Okay, so welcome everyone. Tonight we're going to cover E911, Next Generation 911. We've got Vitaly Grebin and Ben Tanhutko. They both work at LA Networks, along with myself. For those who didn't make it a little bit early to hear some of the things, the Cisco Glendale office is actually going to not reopen, so we'll probably just stay online for the foreseeable future. So if you can,
we're not going to the LA Networks office.
I don't think we could host that many people. It's a pretty small office. So
that's too bad because I live a mile from there.
Yeah. So
I mean, so I don't know if you guys know, but supposedly we are now merged with the Orange County group. So there is an option down the road somewhere to host in Irvine, but I guess you have to be determined. That's why I just heads up.
Yeah,
I second, third, fourth, and fifth that.
I suspect for the foreseeable future, we'll just remain online with these. So next month, by the way, we have a security placeholder, Robert. So you, I, and AJ should probably talk a little bit about dialing that in a little more. We said maybe Firepower because there was a new release coming out, or maybe Zero Trust, or maybe both. So we'll just, but it'll be something very security, which is always top of mind for everyone these days as well. But like I said, tonight we're going to cover E911, Next Generation 911, and I think kicking us off at the beginning here will be Vitaly. So Vitaly is actually a CCIE. His number is even older than mine. So he's been doing this for quite a while. And with that being said, Vitaly, why don't you go ahead and take it over?
Yeah, hello everyone. And yeah, Jason, you're right. So my CCIE number is slightly older than yours, and I've been Cisco forever. Pretty much, I'm coming from routing switching, but today I'm doing purely collaboration. So I work as collaboration architect for LA Networks, and I was thinking what topic to pick up. Like there are many collaboration topics. I'm not sure how many of us deal with collaboration. Maybe majority of us deal with enterprise networking. But anyway, one topic that came to my mind that almost kind of neglected, everyone knows about it, and at the same time we don't, is 911 calling. And that's actually where we will go with 911 classic calling, E911, and then next generation 911. I will do more like storytelling, talk about theory and some laws about 911, some concepts. And then our second part, Ben will be talking about technical and how Cisco does E911 with UCM, Webex, and so on. So let me see how I will share my screen. Bear with me for one moment.
Hey guys, by the way, while Vitaly's getting ready, I'm putting you guys on mute just so you know we don't have any disturbances during the session. So just a heads up.
All right. So I hope that you see the correct screen.
Yep, looks good, V.
All right, let's go. So next generation 911, we'll be talking about concepts, regulations, and practical applications. So our agenda will be, like I mentioned before, classic 911 service, E911 and next generation 911 concepts. And then we'll be talking about new FCC E911 regulations, and then solutions for Cisco UC, Webex Calling E911, and we will do Q&A in the end. So with part one, classic 911 service. We all know probably from our childhood how to dial 911, and we know if you dial 911, it works. But when I checked statistics, I was actually amused about 911 services. For instance, in America, we have 240 million 911 calls per year, or 600,000 calls per day. Can you imagine? And on another hand, it was no universal number for emergency help before 1960s. In 1967, AT&T proposed using 911 as a number, as the emergency number for two reasons. Easy to remember, 911, and it did not overlap with any other numbers. So it became widely accepted. And the first 911 call was made actually in Haleville, Alabama in 1968. Alaska was the first state to implement 911 service. Interestingly enough, there is no national 911 system. It's all localized. Like today in the United States, we have around 6,100 local 911 centers, but no national 911 system. So let's say if you have on-prem Cisco, non-Cisco web solution, you have SIP trunks, or you have PRI line, somebody dials 911, it will go to particular local 911 center where this PRI or SIP trunk belongs, or where this DAD range belongs. So with 911, so let's go back one slide. So there are three variations, so three small concepts that we would need to learn when we're talking about 911 emergency number. Number one, it's PSAP, Public Safety Answering Point, or simply we would say 911 call center, a center, where you have 911 operators accepting calls. And then any epistemic number identification and ELI, epistemic location information. And epistemic number identification pretty much is the same as a phone number, and epistemic location identification, that's our physical address. Now with basic 911, or we would call it classic 911, it was originated in 1968, and no information was passing to the 911. Somebody would dial 911 number and they would need to explain what number they are dialing from, what physical address they are dialing from, what city, because no phone number or name info would be displayed. And then voice calls would be routed based on the area code to emergency dispatch. Let's say if it's LA area code, it will go to LA. And then started from 1999, so several decades passed. Finally, FCC suggested to talk about enhanced 911, which was mandated in 1999. The difference between basic and enhanced, because you probably heard this abbreviation E911 almost everywhere, including Collaboration World. So pretty much with enhanced 911, now caller name and phone number are displayed to 911 operator. And then inside of 911 center, you have LA database that pulls out address of the caller. And then calls are routed based on LA to appropriate emergency dispatch. So pretty much the same idea. The user calls 911 and now woohoo, operator can see phone number and address. Of course, with one requirement, if your telco provider attach physical address to your DAD range or to your phone numbers, because sometimes they would forget to do that during cutover, and we experienced it many times. And then no one tested 911, and then somebody would call 911 5 days from cutover, and oops, 911 center doesn't have any address because somebody forgot to configure it. So with enhanced 911, two additions to classic is this any epistemic number identification and ALI epistemic location information. Now, recently, we started talking about next generation 911, and it's pretty much revolution coming to 911 services. Number one, next generation 911 supports all E911 features and functions, but on top of that, 911 callers can send media, like they can send videos, photos, and text. It allows 911 operator to receive digital data from IoT devices, let's say like wearable devices or maybe security devices in the building, and calls sent to emergency dispatch now are sent entirely over IP bypassing PSTN. And it's supposed to utilize FirstNet, this public safety broadband network contracted to NTT again. And this next generation 911 is a pretty cool concept. It's not in the service yet. Cisco is part of this development group to develop this service. And I think local governments working on this, NTT is working on this to create broadband network. And sooner or later, instead of using enhanced 911, we will start using next generation 911, which will be pretty good because let's say the building is on fire and somebody's dialing 911 from their phone, and then they take the picture and send straight to 911 center, and then 911 operator would send it to firefighters, and firefighters would know exactly what is going on at that point. So this next generation 911 will rely on the FirstNet network. And this FirstNet network, it's a first responder network authority that again, it was outsourced to NTT to create cellular-based network just for this next generation 911 services. And it divides into several layers. Public safety devices, something coming from end users, and then radio access network or RAN, which includes cell towers, same way as wireless network for cell phones. And then FirstNet operated core network. And core network would include national and regional data centers and also other elements that can store, process, and secure user traffic. So all 911 centers can be interconnected with each other, and they can have straight access to firefighters, police. They do this access now, but kind of it's more like static access. They need to call, and when next generation 911 will be implemented, it will be one full mesh network between 911 centers, first responders, police, firefighters, and so on. Cisco actually already produced one product that is enabled for FirstNet, and it is enabled for the future usage for this next generation 911. This is the router. It's industrial IoT IR1101 gateway, and it's something that actually does not look like regular router. When I saw it first time on the picture, I thought like, oh, what is this? It doesn't look like a router, but it does really cool stuff if it will participate in this next generation 911 and FirstNet. FirstNet, by the way, sounds almost like Skynet, but it's not. So here how in the future, next generation 911 services will look like. So the first public, right? So the public emergency, somebody would dial 911, and then it will go with the videos, with the texting, with the pictures, and it will go to the next call center, whatever the physical location is close to the call center. And from there, it will hit the FirstNet. Wireless network shares information and rich data from 911 to first responders, and from 911 calling to first responders. Again, everything will be connected together, and first responders will receive all type of digital information about this emergency cause, health-related information, videos, text, pictures, and they will know exactly what to do in this case. So this is the future, and I would say it's a dream of the future for 911 services. And again, like I mentioned before, we have around 600,000 calls per day. So I think this will improve existing 911 services tremendously. Now, with all of this, next generation 911 is not in place yet. Today we have enhanced 911, but even with enhanced 911, we have challenges. So all enterprises, they use VoIP, either collab or on-prem, to make E911 happy or to make it working correctly, actually, there are several challenges. Number one, remember who is older from us? We might remember this old PSTN server with analog phones and RJ11 jacks that every house was wired with. And it just worked, right? Because usually physical address is attached to particular POTS line. You call 911 and somebody will see your address. But with VoIP networks, when you have centralized location, let's say you have SIP trunk, and then you have satellite sites, and all of them use the same SIP trunk. Now phone location is variable because phone can be located somewhere in Chicago, but maybe SIP trunk is located in data center in Los Angeles. So the call will come out of Los Angeles SIP trunk, not Chicago. Plus phones can be movable. Pretty much it's plug and play if network is ready. And users can take wired Cisco phone with them and connect it somewhere else in the enterprise network. And administrators might not even know. They would think this particular user is still somewhere in San Francisco, but the user decided to move to Texas or was invited to move to Texas office, decided to take the phone with her, connect the phone, and now, ta-da, she's in Texas, but calls, outside calls, still going through San Francisco. And of course, if that user will call 911, it might be that firefighters or paramedics will come to San Francisco asking about this user, but she's in Texas. Also, soft phone clients can be used from anywhere. Like in the Cisco world, we have Jabber or we have Webex Teams, and Webex Teams or Jabber can be installed on PC, on Mac, on iPhones, on Androids, and tablets. And users can take this Jabber with them or Webex everywhere. Now, a user can be even somewhere abroad and maybe decide to dial 911, and it would be probably a nightmare for the first responders or for network administrators or for security people to identify who called from where, what location, what country in this case, and how to reach them. Also, buildings are not the same. Like for the small building, let's say that somebody is dialing 911 from the restaurant, it's just one building. Firefighters would come or paramedics would come, and it would be obvious, like there's emergency right there. But what if we have 20-store building? Can you imagine if paramedics are coming and somebody has a medical emergency and somebody dialed from 20-story, and so they come and security personnel does not know at all what floor they're calling from, and it would be a nightmare for medical responders actually to do something or to find that user. Plus, caller ID can be masked. Whoever works with IP telephony, you know that pretty much one click in the configuration and you can mask the caller ID, or you can substitute the caller ID with something else. And it can be a real mess with the 911 because instead of receiving correct caller ID with the correct address, they can receive fake caller ID or maybe different or maybe masked caller ID with the main number, and they will be guessing at this point where to go. Or even worse in this case, let's say the company is masking caller ID with the main number, but this main number located somewhere in Texas. And billing address usually is attached to main number. Now, without any additional configuration or without implementing truly enhanced 911, if this user will call 911 with masked caller ID, 911 operator will show main number as a caller ID from Texas with the physical address located in Texas. They will go to Texas, even the call came from California. So that can be the issue. Now to fix all of that, because E911 was not regulated. There are some recommendations and some regulations, but not fully regulated until 2019. And finally, in 2019, FCC came up with 2 laws to regulate E911. And some people say these 2 laws, they're almost like next generation 911 laws. They move us further to the next generation 911. So first law, Kerry's law, and the second, Rebound Act. And these two laws now, there is something that companies would need to comply with. And it's not like everybody knows about these laws. When we're talking to our customers about it, some of them are very surprised. What? Now I need to comply, and that deadline already passed, and we didn't even know about it. So first, Kerry's law. Compliance deadline was in February 16, 2020. And this Kerry's law has two foundations or two issues that law is dealing with. Number one, direct dialing. So it's accessibility to dial 911 without outside code. And the second one, notifications. It's awareness of emergency by internal personnel. So now with the Kerry's law, there is a history behind it, and there is history why this law was named Kerry's law. In 2013, Kerry Han Dan was slain by her estranged husband in the hotel room. Kerry's daughter was present and attempted to dial 911 4 times. However, she was unable to reach help because the hotel phone system required dialing 9 before an outgoing call, as normally companies do these days. Kerry's father, Hank Hunt, turned this grief into action because she was not able to reach 911, so 911 never came, responders never came. So his father actually made his mission to ensure that no one would ever experience the struggle that Kerry's daughter faced that day. And outside of this direction of this movement that he started, pretty much this law became alive, Kerry's law. So direct dialing, again, when person dials 911 for all companies, all enterprises, all networks, 911 calls not supposed to have anything in front. So you might want to check your own voice system to make sure that 911 dialing is straight dialing, just 911. And then second one with notifications. Ben will talk more about notifications from the technical perspective. Pretty much I'm just mentioning this from theoretical perspective, but notification means that, let's say you have the building, you have security in the building, and you have VoIP system or unified communication system with IP phones. So if somebody would dial 911 from that building, the idea is that call will not just go to 911 center and then first responders would come and security people would be like stumbled, like what is going on, why you came. So the idea is that security people would be notified if anyone would dial 911. And with this notification, it's not just notification, but it would be context. Let's say they would receive notification either via email, web page, or their phone would ring, and they would clearly see who is calling, what caller ID, what physical address, what office room, and what floor. And they would know exactly what is going on, and probably they would send somebody to check even before emergency people will come. So next one is section 506 of the Rebound Act, and the Rebound law, named in honor of the late Energy and Commerce staff director, Rebound. And he worked a lot to develop E911 concept. And this law actually has some idea. It requires that when you call 911, 911 operator would receive dispatchable location information. Dispatchable location means that it will be correct physical address, and not just address, but what type of building, what floor, what room, and it can go really, really granular. So starting from 2021, January 6, several months ago, it became the requirement for all fixed devices. Fixed devices, it means hardware-based phone, Cisco phone in this case. And for mobile devices and not on-prem devices, this law will be active in January 6, 2022. So these two laws now, that's something that IT departments supposed to work with, because now it's not just our ethical part. or our caring part for people that we're supposed to comply, but now it is by the law that companies supposed to comply and provide dispatchable location, provide notifications, and provide straight 911 dialing. So what are the steps toward this NG911, next generation 911, and what are the steps for companies to comply with this law? For pretty much for us, especially like in our collaboration department, like these days, Ben and I, and some other people in our practice, we do a lot of work with 911 and trying to help our customers so they would comply with these E911 laws. And it will require some configuration, will require some deployments, installations, etc. So the first step is find. Pretty much, we need to make sure that we can identify who is in our enterprise dialing 911. How will we will find the location? Where this location configured? What if they moved to a different site? What will happen then? And what if they moved on premises? How we can find them? All of this, of course, it needs to be planned in front, but it's the first step. We need to make certain how we can find the caller. Second one is route. So how 911 call will be routed to 911 center. Again, if we have either centralized solution with a centralized SIP trunk, or we have decentralized solution with many SIP trunks or PRI lines, we need to be certain that from particular place, particular city, calls will be routed to that local 911 center. We don't want to receive call, we don't want 911 center in Texas to receive call from California at this point. And the next question would be, what caller ID 911 operator will see? Like what actual phone number? Is it masked or not masked? Is it correct caller ID? Or maybe it's all private, no caller ID at all? And what physical address will show? Is it correct physical address that doesn't include building number, it doesn't include floor, doesn't include any other like spaces within the building? And then when we identify how to find the caller, we identify how to route the call, we can think how to notify and whom to notify. So who will be notified of 911 call, what type of notification they will receive, and what caller information they need to see. Interestingly enough, all of this with find, with route, and with notify, like Cisco, for instance, developed the product that actually can do all three of those. With the cloud-based solutions like Cisco Webex or some others, same idea. They developed the solution how to find, how to route, how to notify. And at this point, pretty much I was talking about theory, how 911 works. And I didn't go that deep because I didn't know how many of us are truly doing collaboration thing. So it's more for educational purposes. So we would simply understand the concept of basic 911, enhanced 911, next generation 911, recent laws, what to do to comply with these laws, and what are the next steps toward next generation 911, find, route, and notify. And now we will be transitioning to part 2, the actual technical stuff that you all like. With Webex Calling, E911, and with solution for Cisco UC. So Ben, I can pass it to you at this point.
Thank you, V. Are you guys seeing my screen?
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay, so for the second part, I will discuss the different solutions that we have for E911, right? I will go over the Webex Calling, the emergency services for Webex Calling. There's the Cisco Emergency Responder, which is the CER. And then Cisco Unified Communications Manager also has its native emergency call routing feature that was introduced towards the later part of the version. And we're going to talk about single wire, which is its feature call aware, which does the 911 alerting. So I'll start with Webex calling. Hang on 1 second.
Hey, V and Ben, there was a question in the chat, which was if you're using a soft phone and you happen to be moving from floor to floor for different meetings, etc., is there a way that they would know where you're at as you move with the soft phone?
That would depend. If you have a CER, CER has a way of tracking. It can track by subnets. But if you have WebEx calling, and I'll go over it, there's an option, since it's cloud, there's an option where you could assign for the user an emergency callback and a location that you can assign. So it's very tricky. It's, although it's limited, it does give you an option to give yourself a location in case you need to dial 911. And I'll go over that on this slide. Okay, so WebEx calling. So WebEx calling, you probably heard of it. For sure, Cisco has advertised, has marketed this new product. WebEx calling is Cisco's latest cloud calling offering. It is a cloud-based phone system, which is intended for mid-sized businesses. It's highly flexible. It offers a lot of features that you would find the same as on-prem calling solutions, like voicemail, IVR, contact center, and most importantly, emergency services or 911 calling. So for tonight's presentation, I'll focus on the emergency calling feature of WebEx calling. WebEx calling uses location and emergency callback number, which the administrator, if you're the administrator, you can configure that on the control hub, which you can access by going to the web on admin.webex.com. Control hub is this is the same site where you manage your WebEx teams, if you have WebEx teams, and also your WebEx calling platform. So first is the location, right? The administrator needs to configure a location, and under each location, you configure a default emergency callback number. This number must be directed to a live answering point. It could be your receptionist, it could be your security personnel who can easily assist in the event that there's an emergency, and in case 911 dispatcher, or like Vitaly mentioned earlier, the PSAP, if they need to call back. That emergency callback number is very important, because in case the call drops, or it accidentally the person hangs up, we want the dispatch. Usually, the dispatcher will call back that number, right? And if they are not able to reach you, they will dispatch a police or an ambulance. So that's why it's very critical that the dispatcher will have a reliable and accurate number to call back. And we don't want that number to be answered by an auto attendant or an IVR. Since it's an emergency, you want that call to be answered by a live person. So we need to plan that accordingly, and we need to make sure that this number is tested before we roll it out. And there are, go back. So for the telephone number, there's actually, you have 3 options to do this. You can have, you can put a person's actual telephone number, where if the PSAP returns that phone call, it will go specific to that user's location. You can also go to the location, the default emergency callback number, which you can configure in the global setting, and that is typically configured if you have a user that doesn't have a DID number, or that person's number is only an internal extension, or you can assign it to the user. If the it will let you configure one user with another telephone number as the ECBN, or the callback number. It's used in case the location's main number has multiple floors or multiple buildings. Then you can allocate and assign that number to have a more accurate service address. And for users without hard phone, they have the soft devices. It can work on Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android. So for users with soft devices, they are usually mobile, right? So it's very difficult to provide an accurate emergency address when making 911 calls. So it is recommended that users with soft phones have a phone number and use use a number that has their ECBN, or it has their actual number, their DID number, to ensure that the callback is directed to the actual user. And typically, when you're installing a non-fixed device, the administrator is provided with a warning about making emergency calls for these devices. So emergency calls made from non-fixed devices without cellular capability will not provide a very accurate address. So we just have to do our due diligence when setting this up. And in terms of notification, the emergency call notification feature, it supports a system-generated email that are triggered when a 911 call is made. And it will contain the information identifying the caller, the address information, and the caller it's assigned to. So in the email message, it will contain the active location, such as, and including the date and the time when the emergency call occurred, the dial digits, the user ID, the username, the extension, the phone number if there's an assigned phone number, and the name and address of the location the caller it's assigned to. And when you turn on the notification, there's a couple of ways to how Webex Calling goes about it. The first option is it allows individual locations to turn on the notification. This is the default, and it is automatically selected when an email is not turned on at the customer level, or meaning at the global level. So choosing this option will allow you to enable or disable at the location level, meaning at the local location. And it is configured under the profile section. And the other option, you can turn on email for all location. Basically, if you have, if you just want one location for your entire Webex Calling account, this is the option for you. And what all you got to do is you enter the email address where you send the notification, and that email will be used for all emergency call notifications, unless, like I said, unless you have something specified on the location that's different that you set up on the global location. So that's for Webex Calling. The next solution that I want to go over is the Cisco Emergency Responder, or CER. This is probably, I'm pretty sure you probably heard of this product. It's been out for quite a while. I think I was talking to Vitaly earlier today, and I remember I did my CER install back when it was version 7. So it's been a long time ago. Now it's I think it's version 12.5 now, and I'm pretty sure probably 14 actually. I think since 14 is already out. So what is Cisco Emergency Responder, right? CER is part of the Cisco's collaboration portfolio, and it is meant to enhance the 911 functionality offered by Call Manager. And it has 4 main functions. Number one, 911 routing. You want to be able to route 911 emergency calls to a local PSAP or that 911 dispatcher. Number 2 is notification. You want to be able to alert the designated personnel by email or phone of an emergency call to respond locally. So if I dial 911, if you have a security personnel, you want that personnel to be able to, at least while waiting for the ambulance or the cop to come in, to be able to address that caller. And 911 also keeps a log of all your emergency calls, and so you can easily go back and find out, who made that 911 call for the last, I don't know, month or 2 months. And it also provides the dispatcher or the PSAP with an accurate location of the caller in need. And this is very important, which addresses one of the concerns of the Rebound Act. So let's talk about the feature, right? The main feature of CER, which is the location. It provides real-time location and a tracking database to enhance the emergency call routing capabilities. Phones can be tracked using IP subnets or using SNMP, and this is only for supported LAN switches. So before you deploy CER, probably best to check the data sheets and make sure that whatever switches that you have on your network is supported if you plan to do an automatic tracking of your phones. This is nice if like Vitaly was mentioning earlier, if you have a phone on the first floor and you want to move over to the 4th floor, and if every floor has a different switch stack or different subnets, then CER will automatically update its database and it will automatically track your phones. For if you have a non-supported LAN switch, it will only you can also do a manual tracking, so that's still good. I'm not sure about which switches are supported. I think it's on the data sheet, so I would refer to that. I think there's quite a lot, so I would check that one. And best of all, it is very easy to manage. There's no administrative support for moving phones, like I mentioned. So pretty much it dynamically tracks your phones and updates its database and its locations. So how does CER work, right? So if a user in Boston, right, if assuming that you have a site in Boston and you have a site in New York, the end user in Boston will make an emergency call, right? So it will dial 911 in Call Manager, and there is a CTR route point configured in Call Manager, which will route the 911 call to CER. It will send that call over to CER. And CER will receive the call, reviews the calling device. It will check the database to see the phone's location, which is called ERL, or Emergency Response Location. And that ERL will bind the location of this call. And then CER will modify the calling number based on the database lookup, and it will log the call in its database. Now the callback number and outbound emergency route pattern will be provided, right? And call is then routed back to Call Manager with the modified calling number, and it matches a 911 route pattern in Call Manager, right? Route pattern will be matched and routed locally to the correct gateway. So since CER knows that, hey, a user in Boston called 911, CER will make that determination and let this and tell Call Manager to route that call over going out to the Boston location, and the call will be answered by the PSAP in Boston. Moving over to native emergency call routing in Call Manager. This is introduced in Call Manager version 11, and it is ideal if you have a single site or if you have a small number of sites, maybe, I would say 5 or maybe even less. And it is very easy to configure, and I will go over the configuration with you. And it gives you the ability for the 911 dispatcher to call back, or the PSAP to call you back. And this feature can be enabled globally. So the first step, if you want to turn on emergency call routing, is you go under call routing on your call manager, and there's an emergency call handler, and you turn on the emergency location configuration. It's just a checkbox. And then you configure what's called the ELIN group, or the emergency location group. An ELIN group is a one unique response location. The limitation right now is 100, but again, it's ideal if you have a small site. If you have more than, I would say, even 5 or 10 sites, it may become hard to or very difficult to manage. So, and then there's a limitation of only 100. And the number you define in the ELIN group, it should be one of the DIDs registered to your PSAP. So that way, because that same number is what will be used as the calling number when you call out. So ideally, you want a number that, hey, just in case it's, the PSAP needs to call that number back, that it can be easily be dialed and it will be answered by a live person. So one ELIN number is one emergency call, so we need to plan accordingly. And ELIN within the group must be mapped to the location in the location database. So if you have, for example, if you have Bangalore, you have different sites, assign a number for that site. And how does ELIN work, right? You assign it on the route pattern for 911. You check this, it is an emergency service number, and that will turn on this feature. And this emergency call group is assigned, you have two options. You can either assign it on the device pool level, or you can assign it to the device level on the actual phone. So it depends on how you manage your communications manager. Those are your two options to do that. And how's the call flow? How does it work? Right. So if a user dials 911, the ELIN becomes your number is used in the group, and it's passed to the PSAP as the outbound caller ID. So call manager will keep the mapping of the number to the original call for 3 hours to help complete the PSAP callback. And if the emergency callback is it ignores if you have, for example, if your extension has a do not disturb or it has call forwarding settings, if the PSAP will call you back, call manager will ignore that, because it knows, it keeps track on its database that, hey, this extension dialed 911. So even if you have any call forwarding settings, it will ignore that. And same thing, if you have if your extension is a shared device, meaning if you have an extension that's that appears in 3 different devices, it will only ring if the PSAP calls you back. It will only ring on that line appearance where that phone dialed 911. So that's how Cisco Call Manager native emergency call routing works. Here's a quick comparison of how the emergency call handler and the CER, if you compare them side by side. So emergency call handler is a native to call manager, and CER is obviously another VM. It's a third party. It's a telephony extension. It's another VM. And like I said, there's a limit of 100 locations for the native native emergency call handler, whereas in CER you have 12,500 locations. Location assignment is static, meaning you configure it on the device or on the device pool, whereas CER you can assign it on the switch port or the IP subnet. There's provisioning of the service provider. You need to purchase a DID and associated address on the PSTN database. Where in a CER, you have to have an export file to a service provider or automated update for Intrado V911 service. And here's a quite interesting one. The native emergency call handler does not provide on-site security alert notification, whereas CER has web, voice, or email alert. But I will go over a quick workaround for the alert notification, right? Emergency call handler does not provide actually call history, but it will keep the database for 3 hours of just the mapping, but it won't give you a history of who dialed 911. But you can probably go back to your CDR records and search through that, right? And emergency treatment for unknown locations, there's none a call handler, and for CR, you can configure the default ERL treatment. And support for off-prem users for the call handler, there's none. For emergency calling, it requires Intrado V911 service or location validation and emergency call completion. Let's talk about single wire call aware. Single wire is third-party application, and it is a Cisco partner, and it features a call recording software, which will be triggered. It can trigger text and audio mass notification for any Informacast device like IP phone, desktop, applications, analog or IP speakers. And some of the features with single wire or some of the benefits, it can speed up your emergency response, because of the notification. And it also provides important information, regarding the emergency through notification. So this is what I was alluding to earlier. Since you have the native call emergency calling, and it doesn't provide notification, we can use single wire because single wire is free. Although it has a limited. I need to do a disclaimer. I think it's 50. So there's a limit, but you can buy more licenses if you need to, depending on the number of devices that you have. But single wire can offer notifications in conjunction with the emergency native emergency call handler of Call Manager. So how does the single wire call aware works, right? If you dial 911, the CTI, there's a CTI route point which is set to 911. So when a user dials 911 to call manager, it will send that call over to Informacast, right? And Informacast will match a route pattern, and it routes the call to the PSTN, and it will be answered by the PSAP. But what's more importantly is the notification part of Informacast. If a user dials 911, it will hit a CTI route point 911, and this is being monitored by your single wire. And when that CTI route point is triggered, or when you dial that 911 call, it will trigger an emergency alert or message to the whatever designated recipients you configured in single wire. This is because you have an application user in Call Manager, which monitors this 911 CTI route point. And same thing, as soon as you dial 911, it will trigger that alert, and the phones on your recipient group will receive the notification. And pretty much that's how that's what I have for single wire. Again, these are just very high level of the different solutions that we could use to be compliant with the upcoming FCC deadlines. And let us know if there's if you guys have any questions, or we can go probably deeper. That's all I have. Jason, Vitaly, I think I made it. It's 8 o'clock.
Yeah, there's
I
no
try to
hard
make it.
stop, no hard stop or anything. I think there was one more. Oh no, that was V gave.
Yeah, I was trying to answer all questions. I think I answered almost all of them. Maybe I missed some. Let me see.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if Vitaly did not get a chance to answer, feel free to come off of mute and ask your question.
Yeah.
No, he got to mine.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
he was
he
answering
already answered my
questions like a
questions.
madman.
Yeah, it's kind of hard when you're like presenting and I wasn't really seeing the questions, so now I'm just going over them.
Yeah, I think I did answer only one. What SNMP attributes I use with CR, and I answered all others. So you are free to fly, Ben.
I would have to check the exact attributes. I am actually, I'm not sure on top of my head what it is, and it probably has changed. But
Yeah,
I
because
can definitely find out and get back to you.
it goes by configuration guide, and I think it depends on SNMP version, depends on the software version on both Cisco switches and CR, since CR is improving
Yeah,
with every new version.
yeah, and I remember when I was presenting earlier. Oh, you actually answered it. Yeah, there was a question about the switch that support SNMP, the supporting CR, and I know there's quite a list, and I'm glad you sent the link.
I think I did not send Cisco SNDR document that I mentioned. Let me find it again and I'll send it.
Well, Vitaly's looking for that other link to put in the chat. Do anyone have any other questions?
Actually, I do. So with soft phones, right? Let's say people working from home, right? Is it legal to actually restrict 911 calls, or we have to allow through it?
According to these two laws, now it is illegal to restrict 911 calls.
Yeah.
Either from, like on a mobile phone, you cannot control mobile phones, but let's say if users have Jabber or Webex Teams on the mobile phones, they're supposed to be allowed to use the software clients to call 911. What some of the customers do, they simply would advise users not to use Webex or Jabber for 911 calling because there is no strict or no feasible solution yet for the soft phone. So that's why FCC extended the requirement, the deadline to 2022, because with regular phones, it's understandable. You have CR, so you have different locations. You can trace by switch port, by MAC address, by IP address. With the soft phones, you cannot really trace them if they're completely off premises. Like I checked many cloud-based providers stored from Cisco Webex and RingCentral and some others, and pretty much everybody suggests, even for cloud-based, for hardware-based phones, in this case, or software-based clients, to check physical address configured and to configure or to check it frequently, like some recommendations are once per 3 months, but they would say it is up to the user. It's end user requirement to make sure that the user would update the address. So
Yeah,
it's still blur how it would work with the soft phones.
Yeah, it's still like best effort is the approach that that they have.
So what I've been doing right now is actually when I see users online on Jabber, I just be manually assigning them to different URLs, different zones based on they're supposed to be at that site. So I work for a school district, so I assign them to specific elementary schools or middle schools or high schools. So I guess that's the right way of doing it then. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a tedious work. It's somebody's full-time job if you have a lot of users and you would need to reassign addresses manually. Yeah, but
Okay.
pretty much, yeah, there is no straightforward solution yet.
Thank you.
And
Okay, and
yeah, I just
looks
published
like-
a link for SRND. And whatever CR 12.5 does and all requirements for deployment and all hints and all downsizes, pretty much, it's a nicely explained in that SRND document.
Okay. Any other questions, anyone? Okay. Robert, I think you could probably turn off the recording.